Hello, my name is India Amos. Raise your hand if you can hear me, please. Great. Raise your hand if you can see me. Great. And you all made it to this room without any assistance that I saw, and you're able to raise your hand, so congratulations. Chances are pretty good that you don't have any major visual, auditory, or mobility-related disabilities yet. Now raise your hand if you've ever had to do anything on your phone while holding onto something else with your other hand. A bag, a subway pole, a cat. So you've all had a situational mobility impairment, and if you haven't had that experience, you might be this guy. Don't be that guy. How about if you've ever tried to answer a phone call in a loud place, like a train station, a bar, any New York City street? So you've had a situational hearing disability. Have you ever been in a dark, crowded, noisy bar and tried to use a smartphone to do pretty much anything at all? And maybe you were drunk at the time? Couple hands. So situational disabilities affect everyone. So it's fair to say that everyone here has had some experience with one or more of their senses or physical abilities being impaired, at least temporarily, at some point in their life. And that impairment has probably impacted your use of a web application negatively. And you were frustrated, you didn't like it, but the situation was temporary and it ended. So enjoy that feeling of relief. Again, it may only be temporary. The World Health Organization says there are over 1 billion people with disabilities in the world. That's about 15% of the world's population, 1 in 7. Similarly, in the US, more than 15% of the population has some trouble hearing. Almost 10% have vision trouble. 16% have some kind of physical difficulty. And for adults over 65, those numbers tend to double. Somewhere between 5 and 20% of people in the US have dyslexia. So while a picture may be worth 1,000 words to them, the words describing it, the 1,000 words, may actually be impenetrable. So why am I spreading all this good cheer? Because if you're pouring your heart and soul into making some amazing web application, I'll bet you don't want to build it so that 10 to 15% of the population right off the bat can't even use it, especially if that group of people who can't use your app might include yourself in some situations. And especially if it means your company might get sued. Don't let this be you. When Dixie just a couple of weeks ago lost a suit because they refused to make their website accessible. They said it was too expensive. Guess what's expensive? Lawsuits. So don't be these guys either. So what can you do about this as a future rock star developer? Building for universal access literally makes products that are better for everyone. So if you want to be a great developer, get interested in accessibility. So what are some things you can do to be better than the people who work at perhaps Winn-Dixie? If you only take 3 things from this talk, let them be this: learn the standards, build for differing abilities, and build for differing devices. So I'll go into those in some more detail. Learning the standards. There is a lot of acronym soup out there. We've experienced a lot of it already, but the ones in this field to remember are WCAG, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, and ARIA, the Accessible Rich Internet Application Suite, particularly important if you're doing anything with interactivity, which is why we're in JavaScript. There will be a list of resources linked at the end of this, so there will be lots more stuff besides these. The guidelines are very specific in the WCAG. They are marked with a rating from A to AAA, depending on how important it is to support that particular guideline. And some typical guidelines are make all functionality available from the keyboard. Everything should be able to be used through the keyboard without timing for a specific keystroke. If you have a delay in reading the page, if you have a delay in understanding what's expected of you, or if you have a motion disability, you may not be able to double click as fast as the site wants you to. Similarly, we'll hear a lot about drag and drop. Make focus happen in a meaningful way. One of the very annoying things if you're working from a keyboard, and perhaps you've experienced this, is you click on something, you get a pop-up, and your focus does not move into that pop-up. And you have to actually use the trackpad or the mouse or some other pointing device to get into that. If you don't have a pointing device, hey, you can't get into that modal. Maybe you can't use it. Maybe you can't even close it. What do? You have to close your browser. So the context has to change to go into that modal dialog, and then it has to go back to the main window once you close it. The other big standard that I didn't list there as a specifically accessibility related standard is HTML. And HTML out of the box without any JavaScript attached to it is mostly accessible if you actually use it correctly. You may have heard about alt tags. There is a lot more though than alt tags to making HTML accessible. One of the biggest things you can do is using it semantically. So the H1 heading is the most important thing on the page. The H2 is the second most important. H3, it's not used for changing the size of the text. There will be a link in the resources to how to not abuse Bootstrap in this way, because you can attach an H1 class to an H6 and have it look big if you use Bootstrap, and there's nothing to stop you. There's a really great presentation just about doing that. So don't break accessibility support that's built in by misusing elements, and don't use a generic element like a div or a span when there's a semantic element that's actually built for the thing you want, like a paragraph. And know your elements. Actually read the descriptions. There aren't that many elements in HTML. You can learn what they're for. Building for differing abilities, if you can, the ideal thing is to get actual people to test your software, but at the very least use personas to inform your decisions. There's a link here for a really great list of personas that you can use to kind of understand the concerns of people with different kinds of disabilities. But there are a lot of conditions you might not think of right away as affecting people's web use. And there will also be a link in the resources to a really great Twitter discussion where somebody asked, what are the things that, for people with disabilities, drive you crazy about using the web? And so many people answered, and a lot of people said, is this a disability? I don't know, but this annoys the hell out of me. So some of those examples are a person with ADHD who's easily confused by a really busy page layout. They can't separate out those things. They can't figure out what they're supposed to do. Someone with a sleep disorder uses Flux, which dims your screen in the evening, turns it slightly orange instead of blue so it doesn't disrupt your sleep. And that flattens out the colors. So you may have heard about people with different kinds of color blindness sometimes can't see things on your page. That also affects people who are using a screen darkener like Flux. Someone with migraines may need to lower the brightness. Again, contrast becomes an issue. And people with motion disorders of all kinds, small touch targets may be a problem. So make sure that all the significant content in your application can be accessed by people or robots, which is another thing. If you make your site accessible, it means that search engines can also read it, and other tools that read web pages for you. Make sure that people and robots can see, hear, or who can't see, hear, or process the content on your site quickly can understand what's going on, especially as you make changes to the DOM, which we all do a lot. So building for differing devices is super important. Make sure all the controls in your application are fully accessible and operable on touch screens. If you're doing an on-mouse event, that's not going to work on a touch screen. You can hover all you want on a touch screen and nothing's going to happen. So try not to use on hover. Similarly, if you are using something like a focus event, make sure that you're not triggering an action that happens just upon focus that's not reversible. Because if someone is using a screen reader or a keyboard, they need to tab into that control and suddenly it's got focus. Maybe they're just reading it. A screen reader will read out to you what that label says before you can decide what to do with it. You have to click on it though to read it. So don't make stuff happen when people haven't decided to have it happen. Test to make sure it works with the keyboard and try out a screen reader. Make sure you can get to important elements quickly, that you can explicitly set the tab order, but it's easier to just put things on the DOM in a logical order in the first place, and make sure you can get out of things. Don't create a keyboard trap so that you can tab into something and then you can never exit it. And build for universal access, and it'll literally make products that are better for everything. So again, if there's only one thing you take away from this, that's the way to be a great developer. There's a list of further resources at the link. Thank you.